pushing.
Thank you very much. It's a great privilege to be with President Moon of South Korea. As you probably know, we've had a few discussions over the last number of months, and I actually think we're making a lot of headway in a lot of different ways. We are on a very friendly basis working on trade and working on trade agreements, and we'll see how that all comes out. But much more importantly, frankly, than trade is the other aspect of our relationship that we're working with, and that has to do with North Korea. So we are meeting on a constant basis. We'll be meeting in a little while also with Prime Minister Abe of Japan, and that will be a tri-meeting. So we will see, but I think we're making a lot of progress in a lot of different ways. Stay tuned. Stay tuned. Would you like to say something? Yes.
문 대통령이 오늘 함께하게 돼서 매우 영광으로 생각합니다. 아시다시피 문 대통령과 나는 지난 몇 달 동안에 여러 번 만나서 토의를 한 바 있습니다. 그리고 여러 가지 문제에 있어서 많은 진전이 있었다고 생각합니다. 우리는 또한 그 무역과 관련해서도 아주 친숙하게 지금 대화를 나누고 있습니다. 솔직히 내 생각에는 무역보다는 우리가 더 다른 부분에 있어서 중요한 부분에 있어서 많이 그 토의를 해야 된다고 생각하고, 물론 그 문제는 북한의 문제이기도 합니다. 오늘 그 우리가 만나서 많은 대화를 나눌 것이고, 또 아베 수상과도 3자 회의를 곧 가질 예정입니다. 하지만 여러 가지 문제에 있어서 많은 진전이 있었다고 생각합니다. 그리고 또 앞으로 많은 진전을 기대해 주시기 바랍니다.
대통령과 여러 번 이렇게 뵙고 또 통화를 나누어서 갈수록 아주 친근하게 느껴집니다. 이번에 그 북한의 도발이 대단히 개탄스럽고 또 우리를 격분시켰는데, 그에 대해서 미국이 아주 단호하게 그렇게 대응을 잘해 주셨고, 또 한미 간의 공조도 빈틈없이 이루어지고 있어서 아주 만족스럽게 생각합니다. 이번에 대통령께서 유엔 총회에서도 대단히 강력한 연설을 해 주셨는데, 저는 그런 그 강력함이 북한을 반드시 변화시킬 것이라고 그렇게 확신합니다. 감사드립니다.
As, Mr. President, I've met you several times, and I've also had many telephone conversations with you. And because of this, I'm becoming more and more familiar and with you. Over the years, North Korea has continued to make provocations, and this is extremely deplorable. And this has angered both me and our people. But the United States has responded firmly and in a very good way. And because of this, I also believe that we have very close coordination between Korea and the United States. And because of this, I am very satisfied. Mr. President, in the UN General Assembly, you made a very strong speech. And I believe that the strength of your speech will also help to change North Korea. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you very much, and I'm very happy that you used the word deplorable. I was very interested in that word. I didn't tell them, I promise I did not tell them to use that word.
대단히 감사합니다. 특히 대통령께서 그 개탄한다라는 그 단어를 사용하신 데 대해서 굉장히 기쁘게 생각합니다. 그리고 절대로 내가 문 대통령께 그 단어를 사용해달라고 요청하지 않았습니다.
That's been a very lucky word for me and many millions of people.
많은 사람들에게 이것은 굉장히 행운의 단어이기도 했습니다.
So because of the fact that our trade deal is so bad for the United States and so good for South Korea, said we'll focus on the military, but actually we're going to try and straighten out the trade deal, make it fair for everybody. But our real focus will be on the military and our relationship with South Korea, which is excellent, which is really excellent. So we're going to start that process right now. Thank you very much. Thank you, everybody. Thank you, everybody.
And there you have the end of a photo opportunity there after a meeting between President Trump and South Korea's President Moon Jae-in. Of course, that's happening on the sidelines of the United Nations General Assembly right here in New York. Hi, guys. I'm Amna Nawaz, also live in New York. Making headlines today, though, is something that President Trump said earlier today after another photo opportunity, that one with the Afghan president, in which he hinted at additional sanctions coming down on North Korea. I want to talk a little bit about how that relationship has progressed, especially after President Trump's pretty fiery speech at the UN just days ago. Joining me down in Washington, D.C., Joe Cirincione. He's the president of the Plowshares Fund and a member of the Council on Foreign Relations. Joe, let's start with that, because this is today the news that President Trump saying there could be additional sanctions coming against North Korea. That's a far cry from the fire and fury of several weeks back. Also a far cry from the president's own statement just days ago.
Well, as President Trump has heard from his military advisors, there are military options, but no military solutions. Any military attack on North Korea would undoubtedly be met by a ferocious counterattack from North Korea. This is not Syria. You hit North Korea, they hit back. So sanctions are the one tool that he has, besides negotiations, that actually could have an impact. And there are a set of tougher sanctions that the U.S. could unilaterally impose, particularly on some of North Korea's banking transactions. We've done this in the past. You can target some of the bank accounts that the North Korean leadership uses and hit them pretty hard. You could also, and this is the interesting question we're watching, you could decide to put secondary sanctions on countries that are doing business with North Korea, particularly China. This would be very controversial, so we'll see if he takes this kind of effort. In other words, penalizing Chinese banks who are doing business with North Korea.
Joe, I want to talk a little bit more about those sanctions in a moment, but just to back it up for anyone who missed those remarks on Tuesday, this is President Trump speaking at the United Nations General Assembly. This is what had a lot of folks worried when he had to speak about North Korea. Take a listen.
No nation on earth has an interest in seeing this band of criminals arm itself with nuclear weapons and missiles. The United States has great strength and patience, but if it is forced to defend itself or its allies, we will have no choice but to totally destroy North Korea. Rocket Man is on a suicide mission for himself and for his regime. The United States is ready, willing, and able, but hopefully this will not be necessary. That's what the United Nations is all about.
So, Joe, you have there President Trump threatening to destroy an entire nation. That led to a North Korean representative referring to President Trump as a barking dog. There was this escalation in the war of words. Does this new talk of sanctions now say to you that has been de-escalated?
No, I think he's just pulling another arrow out of his quiver. I don't think President Trump is going to back off from this rhetoric at all. It's been constant in his approach towards North Korea. He likes doing this. It plays well with his base, even though this has been universally condemned by our allies and those we seek to work with. This has had a very negative reaction around the globe. China calling it very unhelpful. The South Koreans cringing as they heard these words. Japan, perhaps the ally closest personally to President Trump in the region, refusing even to comment on it. Most of the experts that I know believe that this will actually embolden North Korea. As they say, they gave Kim Jong-un, the leader of North Korea, the sound bite of the century. North Koreans, the government is going to play this over and over again. It proves their point. They have to get nuclear weapons. They have to get missiles because the U.S. is out to destroy them.
So you talked about what these new sanctions could potentially look like. It's worth pointing out, as a multilateral body, the United Nations Security Council has unanimously approved sanctions 9 times now since 2006, the latest just earlier this month when it came to capping fuel supplies. So what kind of effect would additional sanctions now have? Why would these be the ones that make the difference?
Yeah, and here U.S. diplomacy has worked very well. You have to give kudos to Ambassador Nikki Haley for pulling off these sanctions. These are very tough sanctions resolutions. They're still being implemented, haven't been fully implemented yet. But additional sanctions could be targeted, could focus in. Unlike general sanctions that are prohibiting, for example, purchase of coal by other countries, or prohibiting the sale of certain oil supplies to North Korea. These could be, I would suspect that they're being targeted more directly at the banks, at a more finely tuned effort to hurt the North Korean leadership itself, to tie up their ability to use the funds to buy luxury goods, for example.
There's also something to put into context here, because the South Korean president spoke earlier at the United Nations, and while he shared President Trump's concerns here about the threat North Korea poses, there's a softening of language there. There was also additional funds provided by South Korea to North Korea for humanitarian aid. Is there a little bit of a good cop, bad cop situation going on here?
Well, the South Koreans, President Moon, came in urging a dialogue with North Korea. He believes that the only way to really solve this is by a negotiated agreement, and I think that's true. But he's been frustrated by two things. One is the continuing relentless testing program of the North, which makes it very difficult for the South politically to have that kind of dialogue. And they've been unnerved by the language of President Trump, particularly this suggestion that they could fight the war over there, that millions would die, but they would die in Korea. Well, if you're Korean, that is very unsettling. So President Moon is trying to thread the needle here, trying to find a way to be tough, to stay close to the United States, but not provoke either President Trump or Kim Jong-un in a way that could have us stumbling into a war that no one really wants.
Well, and Joe, you raise an interesting point here, which is worth pointing out. With the actual effect for people on the ground, we're talking about a nation of 26 million people who have already been living under incredibly impoverished circumstances. The North Korean representative in Geneva was at a UN committee for the rights of the child and basically said, look, any additional sanctions are only going to hurt the children here. We already have trouble providing for them. You're only going to hurt these people more. What about that part of the equation?
Well, this is true. This is the ugly truth about sanctions. You feel good taking them because they're a relatively peaceful measure that you can take, and it does hurt the country, but it hurts the country. The leaders are relatively immune to the sanctions. Their lifestyle is hardly affected at all. What you'll see is a tightening of things like medical supplies, for example. Invariably, you remember the sanctions against Iraq before the Iraq War caused enormous suffering for the Iraqi people themselves. In the end, sanctions can never be put on in such a way that they compel a country to either collapse or comply with your demands. They're only useful as a tool for getting that country to the negotiating table. What's been lacking in the administration's program of what they say is maximum pressure and engagement is the engagement part. No engagement whatsoever with North Korea, even though the North Korean foreign minister is there at the UN this week, could meet with the Secretary of State. It's all being done at a very, very low level. No sign that the U.S. has a coherent plan for how to use this pressure, how to use these threats to arrive at a diplomatic negotiated solution.
Meanwhile, we'll keep an eye on both those talks and, of course, the president's Twitter feed in the days moving forward. Joe Cirincione, president of the Plowshares Fund, thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
And thanks to all of you for watching as well. Remember, you can go to abcnews.com at any time to get more on that story and many others. For now, I'm Amna Nawaz, and I'll see you back here soon.